The Montana sky hung low that February morning, the kind of gray that pressed down on a man's shoulders like a weighted blanket he couldn't shake off. Garrett Sullivan's pickup, a 2008 Ford F-150 with rust bleeding through the wheel wells, rattled over the cattle guard at mile marker 47, sending a metallic clang echoing across the empty valley. He was 43 years old, though the mirror lately told him he looked closer to 50. 6'1", lean in the way men get when they forget to eat regular meals, with eyes the color of winter fog over gunmetal. Gray-blue. The kind of eyes that had seen things they'd rather forget but couldn't. His hands gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2 knuckles white. Old habits. The kind drilled into you until they became reflex muscle memory that outlasted memory itself. In the passenger seat, Valor sat with military precision. 7 years old, 70 pounds of German Shepherd discipline wrapped in black and tan fur. His ears stood erect, swiveling independently like radar dishes, cataloging every sound the Montana wilderness offered. A diesel engine 3 miles off, the crack of a branch under snow, the high whistle of wind through pine. The dog wore a tactical harness forest green with a reinforced handle across the shoulders. Not a pet vest, a working vest. The difference mattered. Garrett hadn't spoken in 40 minutes. Valor hadn't made a sound in 3 hours. That was their language, the comfortable silence of two soldiers who'd learned that words were often just noise that got people killed. The voice in Garrett's head, though, wouldn't shut up. You're running again. This isn't running. This is starting over. Starting over in the middle of nowhere with your last $89,000, better than staying where the ghosts know your address. He'd bought the land site unseen. 160 acres outside a town called Copper Ridge, population 600 and dropping. The realtor's photos showed pine forest, a creek, abundant wildlife, and spectacular mountain views. What they didn't show was a way to forget. But forgetting was the only thing Garrett had left to buy. The flashback hit him at mile marker 49. It always started the same way, with heat, the kind that turned your sweat into steam before it could cool you down, that made the air shimmer like the world itself was melting. Desert, somewhere he wasn't supposed to remember. Sand the color of old bone, sky bleached white by a sun that didn't forgive. His voice over the radio. Charlie team advance to the compound. I'll cover from Overwatch. Static then. Copy that, sir. Moving now. The kid Thompson, 22 years old, married 3 months, stepping into the alley first. Garrett's scope. The crosshairs. The door he should have seen opening. The sound. Not the explosion. Worse. The silence after. The pickup's tires hit gravel, jolting Garrett back to Montana. His breath came short, sharp, the way it did when the past grabbed him by the throat. Valor's head turned. Not fast, deliberate. The dog's gray-blue eyes, almost the same shade as Garrett's, locked onto his face. No whine, no nuzzle. Just presence. Solid. Real. Anchoring. Garrett's right hand left the steering wheel, rested briefly on Valor's neck. The dog's pulse, steady and slow, beat against his palm. I'm here, Garrett whispered. More to himself than the dog. I'm here. Valor's tail tapped once against the seat. Acknowledgement. Then the dog returned his attention to the road ahead, ears forward on mission. They didn't talk about the bad days. They just survived them together. Copper Ridge appeared around a bend in the highway like something out of a postcard someone forgot to mail. Main Street ran 3 blocks long, lined with brick buildings that had seen better decades. A hardware store with a hand-painted sign. A post office that doubled as a DMV. A church with a white steeple that needed paint. And Marlene's place. The diner sat at the corner of Main and Timber Street, a single-story structure with big windows and a neon sign that buzzed even in daylight. Garrett pulled into the gravel lot, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the silence. Valor's nose twitched. The dog's nostrils flared, processing the 10,000 scents riding the February wind. Fryer grease, pine sap, wood smoke, exhaust from a diesel truck. Something dead in the woods, maybe 2 days old. A dog that had marked the telephone pole yesterday morning. You eat yet? Garrett asked. Valor's ear rotated toward him. The dog had eaten at 0600 as he did every morning. Garrett knew this. The question was rhetorical. A way of talking that wasn't about information. Yeah, me neither. They climbed out. Garrett moved with the careful economy of a man whose back had been thrown against too many walls, whose knees had hit too many floors. Valor hopped down, landed soft despite his weight, and immediately took a position at Garrett's left side. Not healing, guarding. The bell above the diner door jangled when they entered. Conversation stopped. Not hostile, just small town curious. 8 customers scattered across red vinyl booths, most of them north of 60, all of them white, all of them turning to measure the stranger with the dog that didn't look like a pet. Behind the counter, a woman in her late 50s looked up from pouring coffee. She had steel gray hair pulled into a practical bun, forearms, strong from decades of lifting trays, and eyes that had buried a husband and raised two sons alone. Her name tag said Marlene. "Morning," she said, not a question, an evaluation. "Morning," Garrett replied. "Dog-friendly." "Depends on who's asking." A flicker of a smile crossed Marlene's face. "Sit anywhere." Garrett chose a booth in the back corner, the one with a view of both the door and the kitchen. Valor settled on the floor beside the table, not under it, his body angled so he could watch the entrance, the windows, and Garrett simultaneously. Marlene brought a menu and a glass of water. She glanced at Valor, took in the tactical harness and the alert posture, the disciplined stillness. Military was. Him too, yeah. She nodded once. Her brother had been Army. Iraq. Came back without his left leg and most of his optimism. "Coffee, please." She poured from a pot that looked older than Garrett. "Breakfast specials, sausage, eggs, hash browns. Toast comes with." "That'll work." "How do you want?" "However the cook makes it." Another nod. She appreciated customers who didn't complicate things. 5 minutes. When the plate arrived, Garrett ate mechanically. Fork, chew, swallow. Fuel, not pleasure. He'd learned in the service that food was just another supply line, and you didn't get sentimental about supply lines. Marlene refilled his coffee halfway through. "You the one bought the old Fletcher property?" "Small towns. Everyone knew everything before you did." "That's me. 160 acres up past Timber Creek." "Yes, ma'am." She studied him with the frankness of someone who'd earned the right to be direct. "That's good land. Hard land, but good. Fletcher worked it for 40 years before the cancer took him." Garrett's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Cancer by two. Lung, never smoked a day in his life." She said it matter of fact, the way people in small towns talk about tragedies that happen slow enough to become normal. "A lot of that going around here. Has been for years." "That's so." "Mm-hmm. The mill's closed now, but back in the day it kept the whole town running. Ashford Industries employed 300 people at its peak." She topped off his cup again. "Folks don't talk about it much, but we've had more cancer here than seems right, especially lung and liver." Garrett didn't respond, didn't need to. Marlene wasn't looking for a conversation, just stating facts the way you'd mention the weather. "Anyway," she continued, "welcome to Copper Ridge. Church is Sunday mornings if you're inclined. Hardware store's got most of what you'd need for fixing up the property. And if you need anything else, you just ask." "Appreciate it." She walked away, leaving Garrett with his cooling eggs and a piece of information he hadn't asked for. A lot of cancer. More than seems right. He filed it away. Not his problem. He was here to disappear, not to dig. Valor's attention, meanwhile, had fixed on something near the counter. The cook, a thick man in his 60s with forearms like hams, had stepped out of the kitchen carrying a plate of breakfast sausages. He spotted Valor and his face lit up with the particular enthusiasm people reserve for dogs they assumed were pets. "Well, hey there, buddy." The cook set down the plate and grabbed a sausage grease glistening on his fingers. "You want a treat." He approached the booth, sausage extended like an offering to a deity. Valor's response was surgical in its precision. First the nose, a single sniff, nostrils flaring just enough to process the scent profile. Pork, yes, but also nitrates, preservatives, fat content, approximately 60%, cooked at insufficient temperature to kill trichinosis if present. Then the look. Valor's head tilted exactly 7 degrees to the left. His ears remained forward. His eyes, those gray-blue mirrors of Garrett's own, fixed on the sausage with an expression that could only be described as professional judgment. The dog's gaze slowly lifted from the sausage to the cook's face. Then, with the dignity of a general declining a bribe, Valor turned his head away. Not quickly, deliberately, a conscious choice to reject the offering. The cook stood frozen, sausage still extended, confusion spreading across his face like a stain. Garrett bit the inside of his cheek to keep from smiling. First time in 3 months he'd felt the urge. The cook lowered the sausage. "I've never had a dog turn down food before." "He's particular," Garrett said. "I can see that." The cook retreated to the kitchen, wounded pride trailing behind him like smoke. Marlene watched the whole exchange from behind the counter. When she caught Garrett's eyes, she was grinning. "Your dog just insulted Frank's cooking." "Frank's feelings going to recover." "Eventually, but he's going to talk about this for weeks." She shook her head, still smiling. That's a good dog you got there. Best one I know. Where'd you serve? The question wasn't nosy. It was the small-town equivalent of a handshake. Here and there. Navy, yeah, she didn't press. In towns like Copper Ridge, you learn to read what people didn't say. The way Garrett's jaw tightened when she asked. The flatness in his voice. The scars you couldn't see but knew were there. Well, don't be, but knew were there. Well, she said, you need anything, you let me know. And tell your dog Frank's feelings bruise easy, but he'll survive. Garrett paid in cash, left a $20 tip on a $12 meal, and walked out into the cold February morning. Behind him through the diner window, 8 pairs of eyes watched him go. The property sat 7 miles north of town, accessible by a Forest Service road that hadn't been maintained since the Bush administration. Garrett's pickup bounced over potholes the size of laundry baskets, pine branches scraping the roof like skeletal fingers. The trees here grew thick and old, ponderosa and lodgepole, their trunks black with age and fire scars. Snow clung to the shadows where sunlight couldn't reach, dirty gray and stubborn. When the road finally ended, Garrett parked and climbed out. 160 acres. His now. Every pine, every stone, every shadow. It didn't feel like freedom. It felt like exile. But exile was safer than the alternative. He'd brought supplies in the truck bed, a tent, sleeping bag, propane stove, camp chair, MRE and areas. Enough to survive until he could figure out what came next. Maybe build a cabin. Maybe just stay in the tent until the cold killed him or the past stopped chasing. Whichever came first. Valor hopped out and immediately began a perimeter sweep. Not running, working. Nose to the ground, then to the air, cataloging everything that had passed through this space in the last 48 hours. Deer, elk, coyote, a black bear, possibly female, heading toward hibernation sleep. Human scent old at least 3 weeks. The dog moved in expanding circles, professional and thorough. Garrett started setting up the tent. He'd done this 1,000 times. More. In deserts and jungles and mountains across 3 continents. Pitched tents in sandstorms and monsoons and under enemy fire. This should have been easy. It wasn't. The poles didn't want to connect. The fabric twisted wrong. The stakes refused to bite into the frozen ground. By the time he finished, the tent sagged to the left like a drunk leaning on a lamppost. Garrett stepped back, hands on his hips, staring at his work. It was objectively the worst tent setup he'd executed in 20 years of military service. Behind him, Valor had completed his perimeter sweep and returned. The dog sat at attention, head cocked exactly 7 degrees to the left, studying the crooked tent with an expression that somehow conveyed both concern and judgment. Their eyes met. Valor's head tilted another degree. His ears, perfect triangles of fur and cartilage, rotated slightly forward. His tail remained still. The message was clear, really. This is what we're working with. Garrett felt a laugh building in his chest, not a big one, just a quiet acknowledgement of absurdity. Yeah, I know. Don't look at me like that. Valor blinked, slowly. The canine equivalent of a disappointed sigh. It'll hold. The dog's expression suggested otherwise. We've slept in worse. Valor walked to the tent entrance, sniffed once, then deliberately walked away and lay down under a nearby pine tree. The rejection was complete. This time Garrett did laugh. Just a short bark of sound, but real. The first genuine laugh in longer than he could remember. All right, you made your point. He spent the next 30 minutes repitching the tent properly the way he should have done the first time. When he finished, it stood square and tight, ready for whatever weather Montana wanted to throw at it. Valor observed from his position under the pine, but offered no comment. Approval in the dog's world was silent. The sun was dropping behind the western ridge when Valor's behavior changed. Garrett had been splitting firewood, therapeutic, repetitive work that didn't require thinking when he noticed the dog had gone still. Not relaxed still, alert still. Valor stood facing north, body, rigid ears forward, tail low and motionless. Garrett set down the axe. What is it? The dog didn't turn. His focus remained locked on something in the forest, something Garrett couldn't see yet. Then Valor moved. Not fast, purposeful. He walked into the tree line, glancing back once to make sure Garrett understood. Follow me. Garrett followed. They moved through the pines in silence, Valor leading Garrett's hand, instinctively checking for a sidearm that wasn't there anymore. The forest floor was soft with pine needles muffling their footsteps. Somewhere overhead, a raven called out, harsh and judgmental. After 200 yards, Valor stopped. Ahead through the trees, Garrett saw it. At first, his brain tried to make sense of the shape. A building maybe. An old cabin. No, it was a train. A diesel locomotive, Northern Pacific Railroad markings, faded but visible on the side, sitting in the middle of the forest like it had grown there. Rust bled from every rivet. Moss covered the roof. Pine saplings had sprouted through gaps in the frame. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was that there were no tracks, no rails, no railroad bed, no gravel ballast, nothing. Just a train 3 miles from the nearest existing track, sitting in the woods like a monument to a question no one had asked. Garrett stepped closer. His boots crunched on dead pine needles. His breath fogged in the cold air. The locomotive was old. Judging by the design, probably 1970s, maybe early 80s. The kind they used for freight back when railroads still meant something in Montana. The paint had peeled away in sheets, revealing bare metal underneath. The windows were intact, but filthy, clouded with decades of grime. On the side, barely visible under the rust and moss, words had been stenciled: Northern Pacific Railroad decommissioned 1989, 1989. 37 years ago. How the hell does a train end up 3 miles from the nearest track? Valor approached the locomotive with the same caution he'd use approaching a potential IED. Nose working, body low, every sense engaged. He circled the engine once, twice, then sat facing the cargo door and looked back at Garrett. The message was clear. We need to go inside. Garrett studied the door. Heavy steel designed to keep people out. The lock was a massive thing, industrial grade, rusted, but still intact. Someone had wanted whatever was inside to stay inside. He returned to the truck, grabbed a crowbar and a flashlight, and came back. The lock fought him. Rust had welded it shut more effectively than any key. But Rust was patient, not strong. Garrett worked the crowbar into the gap, threw his weight against the leverage, and felt something give. Once, twice. On the third try, the lock shattered with a sound like a gunshot. The door swung open on hinges that screamed in protest. Darkness spilled out. Garrett clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows, illuminating a cargo space that hadn't seen daylight in decades. And there in the center of the train car, waiting like a secret that had been holding its breath for 37 years, was a footlocker. Military grade, olive drab, the kind issued to officers. Stenciled on the lid, in faded white letters, Lieutenant Colonel W. Bishop, U.S. Navy Special Warfare Group. Garrett's blood turned to ice water. He knew that name. Lieutenant Colonel Warren Bishop, his commanding officer. The man who'd trained him, deployed with him, trusted him. The man who'd died in Kandahar in 2004, 22 years ago. Garrett stepped into the train car. The floor groaned under his weight, but held. Dust motes danced in the flashlight beam like tiny ghosts. The air smelled of rust, decay, and something else, something chemical that shouldn't be there. Valor followed him inside, staying close. The dog's hackles were up now, a ridge of fur standing along his spine. He didn't growl, didn't need to. His body language said everything. This place is wrong. Garrett knelt beside the footlocker. His hands steady under fire, steady through 3 deployments, steady through things that would break most men. Trembled. The latches were unlocked. He lifted the lid. Inside, organized with military precision, were items that told a story Garrett didn't want to read. A folded Army field jacket, name tape still visible. Bishop. A Timex wristwatch stopped at 347. A deck of playing cards, the ace of spades on top. Dog tags on a ball chain. Bishop warranty OPOS. Navy. And beneath those items, files. Manila folders, dozens of them, stacked with the kind of care that suggested they mattered more than life itself. Garrett pulled out the first folder. It was a geological survey map, Copper Ridge and surrounding area. But someone, Bishop, presumably had marked it up with red pen. Circles, arrows, notes in the margins. Arsenic levels 40 times EP, a limit, 1985. Groundwater contamination confirmed. 47 cases, lung cancer, 23 liver cancer, all within 5-mile radius. Garrett opened the second folder. Medical records. Photocopies but legible. Death certificates. All from Copper Ridge. All listing cancer as cause of death. All dating between 1985 and 2005. The third folder contained photographs. Industrial barrels. 55-gallon drums with hazard symbols. A warehouse with Ashford Industries painted on the side. Men in coveralls burying something in a pit at night, photographed from a distance with a telephoto lens. And one photo that stopped Garrett's heart. Warren Bishop alive, standing next to this very train car. The photo was dated on the back August 2004, 2 months before Bishop supposedly died in Kandahar. Garrett's hands shook harder now. His breath came short. If Bishop was in Montana in August 2004, photographing environmental crimes, then who the fuck died in Kandahar in October? At the bottom of the footlocker, wrapped in a plastic bag to protect it from moisture, was a cassette tape, T. Deke brand, the kind they used before digital recording became standard. On the label in Bishop's handwriting, "Sullivan, if you're hearing this, you heard God." Garrett stared at those words for a long time. Sullivan, his name. Not whoever finds this, not to whom it may concern. Sullivan. Like Bishop had known. Like he'd planned for this exact moment 22 years in advance. Garrett pulled out his phone, then remembered. No service. Not out here. But in the truck, he had an old portable cassette player. The kind he'd kept from his dad's things, the kind nobody made anymore, but somehow still worked. He took the tape, the folders, and Bishop's dog tags, left everything else as he'd found it. Outside, the February sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the snow orange and gold. Beautiful. Montana was always beautiful, even when it was lying to you. Valor waited by the train car door, patient and alert. "Come on, boy." They walked back through the darkening forest, Garrett carrying secrets that weighed more than any pack he'd humped through, any desert Valor leading the way, with the confidence of a guide who'd never once been lost. At the truck, Garrett sat in the driver's seat, cassette player on his lap, tape in his hand. The plastic case was cracked with age. The label was faded, but the tape inside looked intact. He slid it into the player, pressed play. Static hissed for 5 seconds. Then Warren Bishop's voice, clear and strong and unmistakably alive, spoke to him across 2 decades of lies. "Garrett, if you're hearing this recording, it means 2 things. First, I'm dead, really dead this time, not the fake death they sold to everyone back in 2004. Second, it means you're exactly where I knew you'd be, Copper Ridge, Montana, standing in front of a train that shouldn't exist, holding evidence of crimes that never happened." A pause, the sound of Bishop taking a breath. "I found something, son. Something Ashford Industries buried in the 1980s. Literally buried. 200,000 gallons of toxic waste in unlined pits less than a mile from the town's water supply. I documented everything. Photos, medical records, geological surveys, everything you need to prove they poisoned an entire town for profit." Another pause. Longer this time. "I was going to blow the whistle. Contact the EPA, the FBI, anyone who'd listen. But before I could, they found out. Ashford has connections, Garrett, the kind that make people disappear. So I disappeared first. Faked my death, hid the evidence, and waited. I've been living under different names for 20 years now, moving every few months, waiting for the right person to find what I left behind. And I knew it would be you, Garrett, because I know you. I know you blame yourself for Thompson's death. I know you've been running from that guilt ever since, and I know you'll end up in Montana trying to disappear. But here's the thing about running, son. Sometimes God puts something in your path that you can't run from, something that matters more than your pain. And when he does, you have a choice. You can keep running, or you can stay and do what's right. If you're listening to this, Valor refused to let you leave. That dog knows what I know. You're not a man who runs when it matters. You made one mistake. Thompson's death wasn't your fault, but you carry it anyway. Fine. Carry it into something that saves lives instead of destroys them. In this footlocker, you'll find everything you need to prove Ashford Industries committed environmental crimes that killed 47 people and counting. Take it to the EPA, the FBI, the press. Anyone who'll listen, finish what I started. And Garrett, when you face that choice between the easy road and the right road, remember what I taught you. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Don't do nothing. Bishop out. The tape hissed into silence. Garrett sat in the truck cab, staring through the windshield at a Montana sky turning purple with dusk. His hands had stopped shaking. His breath had steadied. And for the first time in 3 years, the voice in his head, the one that told him he was broken, that he deserved exile, that running was the only option left, went quiet. In its place, something else. Something he hadn't felt since Thompson died. Purpose. Beside him, Valor sat perfectly still, watching him with those gray-blue eyes that saw everything. The dog hadn't moved, hadn't whined, hadn't begged. But his presence said everything Bishop's recording had said. You're not done yet. Garrett reached over and rested his hand on Valor's head. The dog leaned into the touch just slightly. Permission. Trust. All right, Garrett whispered to the gathering darkness. All right, Bishop, I hear you. He started the truck, but he didn't drive away. Instead, he turned back toward Copper Ridge, toward the town Marlene had said was dying of cancer, toward the secrets buried under 37 years of silence. Behind him, the train sat in the forest, keeping its vigil. And somewhere in the shadows between the pines, if you believed in such things, the ghost of Warren Bishop smiled. The Copper Ridge Public Library occupied a brick building that had been the town's first schoolhouse in 1947. 2 stories, narrow windows, a flagpole out front that rattled in the wind like old bones. Garrett pulled into the gravel parking lot at 9:15 the next morning, Bishop's recording still echoing in his head. Don't do nothing. Easier said than done when something meant taking on a corporation that had already killed one man and faked his death convincingly enough to fool the United States Navy for 22 years. Valor hopped out of the truck and immediately assumed his position at Garrett's left side. The dog's nose worked the air, cataloging scents, old paper floor wax coffee from somewhere inside, and something else. Perfume. Floral. Recent. The library door was unlocked. A small bell chimed when they entered. Inside, the air smelled exactly as libraries should, dust and ink and the particular mustiness of knowledge slowly decomposing. Rows of metal shelves stretched toward the back. A circulation desk sat to the right, currently unmanned. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead with the persistence of insects. "Hello," Garrett called out. Footsteps on hardwood. A woman emerged from between the stacks carrying 3 books and a coffee mug that said, "Librarians do it by the book." She was 35, maybe 36. Dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Wire-rimmed glasses. Cardigan over a flannel shirt. Jeans boots that had actually seen mud. The kind of woman who looked like she'd grown up here and never found a good enough reason to leave. Her eyes went to Valor, first everyone's did, then to Garrett. "Morning," she said, not unfriendly, just evaluating. "Can I help you?" "Hope so. I'm looking for information on local history, specifically industrial history." "That's specific." She set the books on the circulation desk. "I'm Rebecca Thornton, head librarian, which sounds more impressive than it is since I'm the only librarian." Garrett Sullivan. "The one who bought Fletcher's land." Small towns. "Word travels," Garrett said. "Word sprints." Rebecca sipped her coffee, studying him over the rim. "What kind of industrial history?" "Ashford Industries, the mill that used to employ everyone." Something flickered across her face. Not quite pain. More like the memory of pain, the kind that had calcified into scar tissue. "That's a popular topic lately." "Yeah. You're the 3rd person this month asking about Ashford." She set down the mug. Though the other 2 were from out of state, reporters supposedly, asked a lot of questions, didn't share many answers. Garrett filed that away. Someone else was digging. That could be good or catastrophically bad. "What can you tell me about the mill?" Rebecca studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face, or maybe what she saw in Valor's steady, disciplined presence, made her decide something. "Follow me." She led him to the back of the library to a section labeled Local History and Archives. The shelves here were older wooden instead of metal, and the books had the brittle look of things nobody had touched in years. Rebecca pulled down a large binder, the kind with rings and plastic sleeves protecting yellowed newspaper clippings. "Ashford Industries," she said, opening it on a reading table. "Founded 1952 by Theodore Ashford, local boy made good. Started as a lumber mill, expanded into chemical processing in the 70s when the timber market crashed. Employed up to 300 people at peak production. Provided 80% of Copper Ridge's tax base." She flipped pages. Photographs showed smiling workers, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, town festivals sponsored by Ashford. All very wholesome. All very American dream. "Closed in 2007, Rebecca continued. "Official reason was economic restructuring. Real reason was they'd extracted everything profitable and left the mess for someone else to clean up." Garrett leaned over the binder. "What kind of mess?" Rebecca's finger tapped one particular photo. Men in coveralls standing next to industrial barrels, the same barrels Bishop had photographed. The chemical processing was pesticides. Organophosphates, arsenic compounds, stuff you don't want anywhere near groundwater. The EPA had regulations, obviously, but enforcement out here in the middle of nowhere. She shrugged. "Let's just say Ashford Industries and regulatory compliance weren't close friends. Anyone ever investigate?" "Oh, people tried." Rebecca pulled out another binder, this one thinner. 1985, a group of residents petitioned for water testing. Results came back elevated for arsenic and chromium. Ashford claimed it was naturally occurring, paid for their own study that proved the contamination was geological, not industrial. Convenient. Extremely. She opened to a page of handwritten notes. 1998, another round of testing after a cluster of cancer cases. Same result, same explanation, same outcome, nothing changed. Garrett scanned the notes. The handwriting was neat, meticulous, someone who cared about getting the details right. Who compiled this? Rebecca's voice went quiet. My father, Douglas Thornton. He worked at the mill for 23 years. Quality control supervisor. He started documenting things in the mid-90s when too many of his coworkers started getting sick. He died in 2008, lung cancer, never smoked a day in his life. She said it without emotion, the way you talk about pain that's been rubbed smooth by time. He was 49 years old. Garrett looked at the binder again. Pages and pages of documentation. Names, dates, diagnoses. A man trying to build a case with nothing but a pen and stubborn hope. I'm sorry, he said, because there wasn't anything else to say. Don't be sorry, be useful. Rebecca pulled out a folded piece of paper from the back of the binder. This is a list of everyone from Copper Ridge who died of cancer between 1985 and 2010. 47 names, all of them lived within 5 miles of the mill. Garrett unfolded the paper. The list was organized by year, by type of cancer, by age at death. The youngest was 31. The oldest was 68. None of them should have died the way they did. Statistical anomaly, Garrett asked, though he already knew the answer. The state health department had said so. Ashford's lawyer said so. Insurance companies said so. Rebecca's jaw tightened. But if you ask anyone in this town who's lost someone, they'll tell you different. We know what killed them. We just can't prove it. Valor, who had been lying quietly near the table, suddenly lifted his head. His ears rotated toward the library's front entrance. The hackles along his spine rose slightly. Someone was coming. Garrett's hand instinctively moved to his hip muscle memory, reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there. He forced himself to relax. This was a library in Montana, not a compound in hostile territory. The bell above the door chimed. Footsteps. Confident. Expensive shoes on hardwood. A man appeared at the end of the row, mid-50s, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Garrett's truck. Hair gray at the temples, smile that didn't reach his eyes, carrying a leather briefcase that probably had a name brand Garrett wouldn't recognize. Rebecca, the man said warmly. Lovely to see you. Rebecca's expression went carefully neutral. Mr. Ashford? Donovan Ashford, the name from the folders, the name on the warehouse and Bishop's photographs. The man who, if Bishop was right, had been covering up industrial poisoning for 40 years. He looked like someone's favorite uncle. Kindly, trustworthy. The kind of man who sponsored Little League teams and donated to church fundraisers. Garrett had known men like this before. Learned the hard way that the most dangerous ones always looked harmless. Ashford's gaze shifted to Garrett. His smile widened. And you must be our newest resident. Garrett Sullivan, correct? That's right. Donovan Ashford, I handle development consulting for the region. He extended his hand. Garrett shook it. Firm grip, dry palm. The handshake of a man who'd practiced appearing genuine. I heard you purchased the Fletcher property, Ashford continued. Beautiful land, though I have to say it's not the easiest piece of real estate to develop. Rocky soil, limited road access, and the winters up there can be brutal. I'm not looking to develop it. No, well, that's refreshing. Most folks who buy land out here have big plans. Ashford glanced at the binders on the table, taking in the Ashford Industries labels without comment. Doing some research. Local history. Ah, well, you couldn't ask for a better guide than Rebecca. Her father was one of our most dedicated employees. He said it with what sounded like genuine warmth, like he'd forgotten that dedicated employee had died of cancer at 49. Rebecca said nothing. Actually, Ashford continued, turning his attention back to Garrett. Since you are new to the area, perhaps we could have coffee sometime. I'd love to discuss the property. I have clients who've been looking for land in that particular area, and I could offer you a very fair price. Double what you paid, in fact. $180,000 for land. Garrett bought at $89,000. A $91,000 profit for doing absolutely nothing except leaving. That's generous, Garrett said carefully. I believe in taking care of our community. Copper Ridge has been good to the Ashford family for 3 generations. We like to give back when we can. The smile never wavered. Think it over. No pressure, but the offer stands. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a business card. Embossed, heavy stock. The kind of card that cost 4 cents each instead of 2. My personal number. Call anytime. Garrett took the card. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. Ashford nodded to Rebecca. Always a pleasure, my dear. Give my regards to your mother. He walked out, expensive shoes clicking on hardwood, leaving behind the faint scent of cologne and something else Garrett couldn't quite name. Not threat exactly, just the presence of power, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. The bell chimed. The library fell silent. Rebecca let out a breath she'd been holding. That was unusually direct. He does that often. Show up and make offers. He's been buying up property around Copper Ridge for the past 5 years. Usually targets people who are struggling financially. Offers them enough to get out of debt and relocate. She closed the binders. Convenient way to make sure nobody's around to ask uncomfortable questions. Valor had remained perfectly still throughout the entire exchange, but his eyes had tracked Ashford's every movement. Now the dog rose and walked to the library entrance, nose working the floor where the man had stood. The hackles were still up. Your dog doesn't like him, Rebecca observed. Valor doesn't like anyone, but he really doesn't like him. Smart dog. Garrett pulled out his phone, pretended to check messages he knew wouldn't be there, then said carefully, "You mentioned 2 reporters asking about Ashford Industries. They find anything useful?" If they did, they didn't share it. Rebecca studied him with the same evaluating look from earlier. Why are you really asking about all this, Mr. Sullivan, chum? Garrett. Garrett then. Why, he could lie, should lie. The smart play was to thank her for the information, walk away, hand everything to the FBI, and let professionals handle it. But Bishop's voice was still in his head, and the list of 47 names was still on the table. And Rebecca Thornton was standing there looking at him like she'd been waiting years for someone to finally ask the right questions. I found something, Garrett said, on my property. Evidence that suggests Ashford Industries buried toxic waste in unlined pits in the 80s. 200,000 gallons less than a mile from the town's water supply. Rebecca's face went very still. What kind of evidence? Documents, photographs, geological surveys, medical records, everything needed to prove contamination. Where did you get this? Can't tell you that yet, but it's real, and it's detailed. Someone spent years documenting everything. Rebecca sat down slowly like her legs had stopped working. My father, she whispered. He always said someone would find it eventually. Said the truth couldn't stay buried forever. Your father knew about this. He suspected. Tried to prove it, but he didn't have resources, didn't have money for independent testing, didn't have lawyers. She looked up at Garrett, and then he got sick and didn't have time. Garrett pulled out his phone again, this time opening the photos he'd taken of Bishop's documents. He showed her the geological survey with the red annotations. Rebecca's hand went to her mouth. This is everything we needed. Where did you find this? The train, Garrett said, the one in the forest on my property. There's a train on your property. Northern Pacific Diesel, decommissioned 1989, sitting 3 miles from the nearest track with no way to have gotten there. Rebecca stared at him like he'd started speaking in tongues. That's impossible. I thought so too, but it's there, and so is a footlocker full of evidence. He swiped to another photo, the one of Bishop standing next to the train car dated August 2004. Who is that? Rebecca asked. Someone who tried to do what your father tried to do. Someone who didn't make it. Rebecca studied the photo for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes were hard. What are you going to do with this? I don't know yet. FBI, EPA, maybe both. But I need to understand what I'm dealing with first. Who Donovan Ashford really is. What kind of resources he has. Who else might be involved? He's connected, Rebecca said, not just locally, state level, maybe federal. His uncle was a senator in the 90s. His cousin works for the Montana Attorney General's office, and he's got enough money to make problems disappear. People too? I don't know, but I wouldn't want to test it. Garrett looked at the list of names again. 47 people, 47 families, 47 funerals where someone like Donovan Ashford probably sent flowers and spoke about tragedy while knowing exactly what had caused it. I need copies of everything you have, he said. Your father's notes, the water testing results, the list of names, all of it. Why? Because if I'm going to take this to federal authorities, I need more than one man's documentation. I need corroboration, independent sources, a pattern they can't dismiss. Rebecca nodded slowly. I can make copies, but Garrett, be careful. My father tried to expose this and he ended up dead. The man you won't tell me about tried, and apparently he ended up dead too. Ashford doesn't lose. Everyone loses eventually. Maybe, but he's been winning for 40 years. Valor's head suddenly snapped toward the window. His body went rigid, ears forward, staring at something in the parking lot. Garrett moved to the window. A black Mercury Grand Marquis sat 3 spaces away from his truck. 2 men in the front seat, both watching the library. Not hiding, just observing. Friends of yours? Rebecca asked. Never seen them before. But he'd seen the type. Security, private contractors. The kind of muscle that corporate money bought when it needed problems handled quietly. Looks like Ashford wants to make sure I think about his offer, Garrett said. Or make sure you don't think about anything else. Garrett pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the sedan, zoomed in on the license plate. Montana tags. He'd run them later, though he suspected they'd come back registered to an LLC with a P.O. box address. I should go, he said. The longer I stay, the more attention this draws. Rebecca was already gathering the binders. Give me your email. I'll scan everything and send it tonight. They exchanged information. Garrett headed for the door, Valor at his side. Mr. Sullivan, Rebecca called after him. He turned. Thank you, she said quietly, for not running. A lot of people would have sold that land and left. Day's not over yet. No, but you're still here. Outside, the February sun had broken through the clouds, turning the snow on the distant peaks brilliant white. The kind of beautiful that made you forget Montana could kill you if you let your guard down. Garrett walked to his truck, aware of the Mercury's occupants tracking his movement. He didn't look at them directly, didn't acknowledge them. Just climbed in, started the engine, and drove away like he had nothing to hide. In his rearview mirror, the sedan pulled out and followed. Not close. Professional distance. Maybe 3 cars back. Valor watched them through the rear window, silent and evaluating. Yeah, Garrett said. I see them too. He drove back toward his property, the Mercury following for the first 2 miles before peeling off at a crossroads and disappearing down a service road. Message delivered. Message received. We're watching. We know where you live. We know what you're doing. Garrett's jaw tightened. Back at the campsite, he spent the afternoon organizing Bishop's documents, photographing every page, creating backups, uploading encrypted files to a cloud server. The kind of digital redundancy that meant if something happened to the physical evidence, the information would survive. The kind of preparation you made when you knew someone might try to make sure evidence disappeared. At 4:30, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but curiosity or maybe instinct made him pick up. Mr. Sullivan, a voice, male, electronically distorted, the kind of filter that turned human speech into something mechanical and cold. Who is this? A friend. Someone who wants to help you make the right decision. I'm not interested in the train on your property contains materials that don't belong to you, materials that certain parties would very much like to recover. If you cooperate, there's a considerable sum of money available. If you don't cooperate, the voice trailed off. The threat hung in the silence. If I don't cooperate, what? Garrett asked. Montana is beautiful but dangerous, Mr. Sullivan. Accidents happen. People get lost in the wilderness. Forest fires start. It would be tragic if something happened to you, or to that loyal dog of yours. The line went dead. Garrett stared at his phone. They'd threatened Valor, threatened his dog. Something cold and surgical clicked into place in Garrett's mind. The part of him that had learned to operate in hostile territory. The part that didn't negotiate with threats. He looked at Valor, who was lying near the tent watching him with those gray-blue eyes that missed nothing. They just made a mistake, Garrett said quietly. The dog's tail thumped once. Agreement. At 6 o'clock, Garrett's phone rang again, this time a number he recognized. Marlene's place. Garrett, Marlene's voice tight with urgency. You need to get to town. Now. What happened? There's a boy missing. Liam O'Connor, 9 years old. Went hiking with his older brother this afternoon near the old Ashford mine. Brother came back. Liam didn't. Garrett was already moving, grabbing his pack, his flashlight, checking Valor's tactical harness. How long's he been gone? 3 hours. Search and rescue is organizing, but Sheriff Briggs says they can't go into the mine area until morning. Says it's too dangerous in the dark. Where's the mine? North of your property, maybe 2 miles. But Garrett, there are collapsed shafts, toxic gas pockets from the old mining operations. People have died up there. I'm on my way. He hung up, looked at Valor. You ready to work? The dog was already standing body coiled, waiting for the command. They drove into Copper Ridge as the sun dropped behind the western ridge, painting the town in shades of orange and shadow. Main Street was crowded with trucks. People gathered outside the sheriff's office, fear etched on every face. Garrett parked and walked toward the crowd. Valor stayed close, ignoring the people focused on Garrett. Sheriff Briggs stood on the steps, 60 years old and 20 pounds overweight, trying to calm a woman who was clearly Liam's mother. Tears streaked her face. Her hands shook. Ma'am, I understand, but we cannot send people into that mine complex in the dark. It's suicide. We'll resume at first light with proper equipment. First light, she screamed. My son is out there now. He's 9 years old. I'm aware, Mrs. O'Connor, but I'll go. Everyone turned. Garrett stepped forward. I'll go look for him. Sheriff Briggs' expression hardened. Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate the offer, but this isn't some kind of movie. That mine is a death trap. Unstable shafts, arsenic gas pits that drop 40 feet with no warning. I've worked in worse conditions. Inoke, with all due respect, you're not a trained search and rescue professional. No, but I'm a trained Navy SEAL with a K-9 who's worked search operations in 3 combat zones. And that boy doesn't have until morning. The crowd went quiet. Mrs. O'Connor grabbed Garrett's arm. Please, please find my son. Sheriff Briggs studied Garrett for a long moment. Whatever he saw in Garrett's eyes, the steadiness, the certainty, the complete absence of doubt made him sigh. Against my better judgment, the sheriff said, but if you die up there, I'm not sending more people to recover your body. Fair enough. Garrett turned to leave, but Valor didn't follow. The dog sat on the sidewalk looking back toward the truck. Garrett frowned. Valor, come. The dog didn't move. Valor. Still nothing. The dog just sat there staring at the truck, then at Garrett, then back at the truck. What is it, boy? Valor stood, walked to the truck, then walked back to Garrett. Repeated the action 3 times, and then Garrett understood. The dog wasn't refusing to go. He was refusing to let Garrett go alone without preparation. You're right, Garrett said quietly. We need gear. He opened the truck bed, pulled out the pack he'd assembled earlier. Rope, first aid kit, emergency blanket, water, energy bars, headlamp, chemical light sticks. Only then did Valor relax. Only then did the dog's tail wag once. Message delivered. Now we're ready. They headed north into the darkening forest toward a mine that had been abandoned for 40 years and a boy who had maybe hours left. Behind them, the crowd watched until they disappeared into the trees. And somewhere in that same darkness, Bishop's ghost walked beside them, whispering the words that had brought Garrett here, don't do nothing. The forest at night was a different world. The pines became black pillars against a darker sky, their branches interlocking overhead like the ribs of some enormous beast. Garrett's headlamp cut a narrow tunnel through the darkness, illuminating 10 feet of forest floor. Pine needles exposed roots, stones that could turn an ankle if you weren't careful. Valor moved ahead, nose to the ground, working a scent trail invisible to human senses. The dog's training had never faded. 4 years since they'd left the service, and he still moved like the professional he'd been bred and trained to be. They'd been walking for 40 minutes when Valor stopped. His head lifted, ears forward, body absolutely still. Garrett killed his headlamp, let his eyes adjust to the ambient moonlight filtering through the canopy. Listened. At first nothing, just wind through pine branches. The distant call of an owl, his own heartbeat steady and controlled. Then he heard it. Faint, barely audible. Crying. A child trying to be brave failing. Valor's tail moved once. Confirmation. The dog had found him. They moved forward carefully. The ground here was treacherous, pocked with depressions that could be shadow or could be mine shafts hidden under 40 years of pine needles and decay. One wrong step and you'd drop into darkness that might not have a bottom. The crying grew louder. Garrett clicked his headlamp back on. The beam caught something 30 feet ahead, a pit maybe 15 feet across, edges ragged with collapsed earth, and at the bottom, barely visible in the shadows, a small figure. Liam. The crying stopped. A face looked up, pale and streaked with dirt and tears. Hello. Liam O'Connor. Yes, I'm Liam. Are you here to get me? Garrett approached the edge, carefully testing each step. The pit was deeper than he'd thought, 20 feet, maybe 25. Steep sides, mostly rock and hard clay. No easy way down without equipment or rope. He unshouldered his pack, pulled out the climbing rope he'd thrown in at the last minute. 60 feet of kern mantle rated for climbing. Old habit. Always carry more rope than you think you'll need. Liam, are you hurt? My ankle, I think it's broken, and my arm hurts really bad. Okay, I'm going to come down and get you. Can you stay calm for me? I'll try. The boy's voice was shaking but controlled. Good kid, trying to be brave. Garrett secured one end of the rope around a thick pine trunk, tested the knot twice, then looked at Valor. Stay. Guard. The dog sat assuming watch position at the pit's edge. His job now was to make sure nothing approached while Garrett was vulnerable. The descent was slow. The walls were loose, sending small avalanches of dirt and stone rattling down with each foothold. Garrett's shoulders screamed from supporting his weight, old injuries reminding him he wasn't 25 anymore. But he'd done harder rappels under enemy fire. This was just physics and pain. He reached the bottom. The pit floor was cluttered with debris, rotted timber from old mine supports, rusted metal, and something that made his stomach tighten. Industrial barrels. 55-gallon drums corroded and leaking with faded hazard symbols barely visible on their sides. The same symbols from Bishop's photographs. This wasn't a natural pit. This was a dump site. Liam sat against the far wall, cradling his left arm. The boy was small, for 9 red hair plastered to his forehead, with sweat despite the cold freckles standing out against skin gone pale with shock. Garrett knelt beside him. "I'm Garrett. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need to check your injuries first." "Okay." "Okay." He ran through a quick field assessment. The ankle was swollen, possibly fractured. The arm had an ugly bruise forming, but no obvious deformity. Likely a deep contusion, maybe a hairline fracture. Painful but survivable. What worried him more was the boy's breathing. Shallow, rapid, and the smell in the pit chemical acrid, burning the back of Garrett's throat. The barrels were leaking, had been for years, probably decades, and whatever was inside them was turning the air toxic. They needed to get out, now. "Liam, I'm going to carry you up. It's going to hurt your arm and ankle, and I'm sorry about that. But we can't stay down here. Understand?" The boy nodded, jaw clenched. Garrett fashioned a quick harness from the rope securing Liam to his chest, the way he'd carried wounded soldiers in another lifetime. The boy weighed maybe 70 pounds. Light. But climbing one-handed with that weight would be brutal. He started up. The walls crumbled under his boots. Loose rock and clay cascaded down, pelting them both. Garrett's fingers found holes in the rock, face old calluses tearing open against stone. His shoulders burned. His lungs screamed for clean air. Halfway up, his left boot lost purchase. He slid 6 inches before catching himself, Liam crying out as the sudden jolt jarred his injuries. "Hang on, buddy. I've got you." 10 more feet, then 5. Valor appeared at the edge, looking down with those watchful eyes. The dog's presence alone gave Garrett something to focus on, something real and solid in a world that had become pain and darkness and chemical stink. One more pull, one more reach. His hand found the lip of the pit. He hauled himself and Liam up and over, collapsing on solid ground, gasping. Valor immediately moved to Liam, sniffing the boy carefully, checking for additional injuries, the way he'd been trained to assess casualties. Liam's hand reached out, trembling, and touched Valor's head. "Good dog." Valor's response was immediate, a slow, deliberate blink, the canine equivalent of tolerating the compliment while making it clear he was a professional, not a pet. Despite everything, Garrett almost smiled. He pulled out his radio. "Sheriff Briggs, this is Sullivan. I have the boy. He's alive, injured, but stable. We're coming out." Static, then the sheriff's voice, thick with relief. "Copy that. Medical is standing by." Garrett fashioned a splint for Liam's ankle using branches and spare rope, then lifted the boy onto his back. Lighter than a full pack. Easier than carrying wounded through hostile territory. But his body remembered. The old injury in his lower back flared. The scar tissue in his right shoulder pulled tight. He was 43 years old, not 23, and his body wouldn't let him forget. They started back toward Town Valor, ranging ahead, checking the path, making sure it was safe. Step by step, he pushed forward. Long, painful minutes where Garrett's legs threatened to give out, where Liam whimpered despite trying to be brave, where the February night pressed down with cold that bit through clothing and settled into bones. But they walked, one step, then another. The way you survived anything by refusing to stop moving forward. The lights of Copper Ridge appeared through the trees like a miracle. Mrs. O'Connor's scream when she saw them was pure relief. She ran forward, tears streaming, pulling her son into her arms with the desperate strength of someone who thought they'd lost everything. The crowd erupted in applause. Garrett stood apart, suddenly exhausted, feeling the adrenaline drain away and leave only pain in its wake. Sheriff Briggs approached, hand extended. "That was either very brave or very stupid, Mr. Sullivan." "Probably both. Either way, you saved that boy's life." The sheriff's grip was firm, genuine. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank him." Garrett nodded toward Valor, who sat calmly beside him, ignoring the attention professional to the end. Marlene pushed through the crowd, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. She pressed one into Garrett's hands. "You look like you could use this. I could use about 10 of these. I'll keep them coming." She glanced at Valor. "And I owe your friend here the finest steak I can cook. On the house. Forever. For the first time since entering the forest, Valor's tail wagged. Once. Acknowledgement. Garrett was about to respond when his phone buzzed. Text message. Unknown number. He opened it. A single photograph. His truck parked outside the library earlier that day. Taken from a distance, probably telephoto lens. Below it, 3 words. Leave Copper Ridge. He showed it to the sheriff. Briggs's face hardened. That a threat? Seems like it. You want to file a report? Garrett thought about it. Thought about what filing a report would do: create a paper trail, draw attention, potentially warn whoever sent the message that he was taking them seriously. Not yet, he said. Your call. But Mr. Sullivan, be careful. We've had people go missing around here. People who asked too many questions about things powerful folks didn't want asked about. Like who? The sheriff looked around and lowered his voice. You know, there was an environmental activist came through here in 2004. Name was something Bishop, I think. Asked a lot of questions about the old mill. Then one day he just disappeared. Left his motel room. Left his car. Left everything. Never seen again. Garrett's blood went cold. What happened to him? Official story. Probably got lost hiking and died of exposure. His body never turned up, but that happens in Montana. Wilderness swallows people whole sometimes. Briggs paused. Unofficial story. He was getting too close to something Ashford Industries didn't want known. And nobody investigated. Investigated what man disappeared. No crime scene, no witnesses, no body. Just another tragedy in a town that's seen too many. Garrett looked down at his phone at the threat still glowing on the screen. They'd killed Bishop, or made him disappear so convincingly it amounted to the same thing. And now they were warning Garrett he could be next. He should leave. Take the smart play. Hand everything to the FBI and get the hell out of Montana before he ended up another unsolved disappearance. But when he looked up, he saw Mrs. O'Connor holding Liam, saw Rebecca Thornton standing at the edge of the crowd watching him, saw Marlene with her coffee pot and her determination to feed everyone who needed feeding, saw a town that had been poisoned and lied to for 40 years. And he thought about Thompson, about the kid who died because Garrett made the wrong call, about all the calls he'd made since that were about running, about hiding, about choosing safety over what was right. Valor pressed against his leg, solid, real, anchoring. I'm not going anywhere, Garrett said quietly. The sheriff nodded slowly. Then watch your back, because they're watching you. That night, Garrett drove back to his property with Valor in the passenger seat. The truck's headlights carved tunnels through darkness, illuminating trees and shadows in the road that led nowhere except deeper into the Montana wilderness. He should sleep. His body screamed for it, but sleep felt like surrender. Instead, he parked at his campsite, built a fire, and sat reviewing everything he'd learned. Bishop's documents, Rebecca's father's notes, the list of names, the photographs, 40 years of evidence that proved Ashford Industries had poisoned an entire town. And now, with Liam's rescue, he had something else. Physical proof: the industrial barrels in the pit. They're still leaking, still contaminating groundwater. He pulled out his phone, started composing an email to the FBI, a field office in Helena. Attached photographs, attached scanned documents, wrote a detailed summary of everything he'd found. His finger hovered over the send button. Once he sent this, there was no going back. He'd be officially involved, officially a target, officially choosing the hard road over the easy one. When you face that choice between the easy road and the right road, remember what I taught you. Bishop's voice from the recording. Clear as if the man were sitting across the fire. Garrett hit send. The email disappeared into the digital void. Somewhere servers would route it to Helena. Tomorrow, maybe the day after, someone would read it. Start an investigation, send inspectors. Or maybe they'd ignore it. Bury it. Let Ashford Industries bury him. Either way, the choice was made. He added another log to the fire, watched sparks spiral up into the night sky like prayers. Valor lay nearby, head on his paws, but eyes open, always watching. What do you think, boy? Did I just make the biggest mistake of my life? Valor's tail thumped once against the ground. No, you made the right call. Garrett was pulling out his sleeping bag when his phone rang. 3 in the morning. Nothing good ever came from phone calls at 3 in the morning. Rebecca's name on the screen. He answered. Rebecca, Garrett. Her voice was tight, controlled panic underneath. My house is on fire. He was moving before she finished the sentence, killing the fire, grabbing his keys. Where are you? Outside, I got out. But Garrett, it started in 3 places at once. Kitchen, bedroom, garage. All at the same time. Arson. Professional arson. Are you safe? Yes, fire department's here. But, Garrett, all my father's notes, everything I had on Ashford Industries, it's all inside. The message was clear. They'd waited until she'd helped him, until she'd given him copies of her father's research, and then they'd burn the originals. Erasing evidence, sending a message. This is what happens to people who help. Stay there, I'm coming. He made it to Rebecca's house in 15 minutes, driving too fast on roads that didn't forgive mistakes. The fire trucks were already there, hoses drowning what was left of a modest single-story home. Flames still licked from the windows. Smoke billowed black against the pre-dawn sky. Rebecca stood in the yard, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, watching her life burn. Garrett parked and walked over. Valor stayed in the truck, understanding this wasn't a working situation. You okay? Stupid question. Of course she wasn't okay. They did this. Not a question, a statement. I helped you and they burned my house. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. She turned to look at him, and her eyes were dry now, tears burned away by something harder. Be useful. Finish this. I sent everything to the FBI. They'll investigate. Will they? Because my father sent evidence to the EPA 20 years ago and nothing happened. Bishop tried to expose them and he disappeared. How many people have to try and fail before you realize the system is broken? She wasn't wrong. The fire chief approached a man in his 50s with soot-streaked face and exhaustion in his eyes. Miss Thornton, we've got it contained, but I'm sorry there's not much left inside. How did it start? The chief hesitated. We'll need to do a full investigation, but preliminary assessments suggest multiple points of origin. Accelerant was probably used. So arson. I can't make that determination until... It's arson, chief. We both know it. The chief sighed. I'll file a report with the sheriff. Rebecca laughed bitter and hollow. A report. Great. That'll fix everything. Garrett watched the house burn, watched firefighters spray water on what had already been destroyed, and felt something crystallize inside him. The FBI might investigate, eventually. Maybe, but eventually wasn't good enough. Rebecca was right. The system was broken. Corrupted. Bought and paid for by people like Donovan Ashford, who'd learned that money and connections could make evidence disappear and witnesses shut up. Bishop had trusted the system, tried to work within it, ended up dead or disappeared. Rebecca's father had trusted the system, ended up dying of cancer while his documentation burned to ash. How many more people would trust the system and end up destroyed? Where are you going to stay? Garrett asked. I don't know, motel, I guess, or maybe I'll just leave. Copper Ridge doesn't want people who ask questions. Don't leave. She looked at him surprised. Why not? Because they want you to leave. They want everyone who knows the truth to run or hide or disappear. That's how they win. So would I stay and wait for them to burn me next time? Garrett didn't have an answer for that, because she was right to be scared. Because staying was dangerous. Because the smart play was running. But running meant they'd already won. His phone buzzed. Text message. Sheriff Briggs, fire at Thornton House. Also reports of brush fire starting north of town. High winds pushing it south. Evacuation advisory for northern residences. Garrett looked up at the sky. The wind had picked up, pushing smoke from Rebecca's house toward the south. And in the distance beyond the ridge, a faint orange glow that hadn't been there an hour ago. They're burning the evidence, he said quietly. What? The mine. The pit where I found Liam. The barrels. They're burning it all. Rebecca's eyes widened. A forest fire? They'd risk burning down the whole town just to destroy evidence. If the evidence could destroy them, yeah, they would. His phone rang. Marlene. Garrett, where are you? Oh, Rebecca's house. Why? You need to get out of there. The fire's spreading fast. Wind's pushing it straight toward town. Sheriff's calling for evacuation of everything north of Timber Street. How bad? Bad enough that they're talking about losing half the town if it jumps the fire break. Garrett looked at Rebecca. You have a car. It was in the garage. Then you're riding with me now. They ran to his truck. Valor had already sensed something wrong, standing alert in the passenger seat, nose pressed to the window. Garrett started the engine, pulled onto Main Street. All around them, people were evacuating. Cars loaded with possessions, families stumbling out of houses, confusion and fear spreading faster than the fire itself. And then Garrett saw something that made his blood freeze. Valor wasn't looking in at the fire. The dog was staring north toward Garrett's property, toward the forest. Body rigid, hackles raised, every muscle coiled. What is it, boy? Valor barked. Sharp, urgent. The bark that meant danger moved now. Then the dog jumped out the window. Valor. But the dog was already running not away from the fire, but toward it, toward the forest, towards something only he could sense. Garrett grabbed his pack and ran after him. Rebecca shouted behind him, "Garrett, what are you doing? Stay in town, get to safety." He didn't wait for her response, just ran following Valor's dark shape through the smoke-filled darkness and went into the forest that was starting to burn. The heat hit him first. Then the smoke thick and choking, turning the world into a nightmare of orange shadows and black air. Garrett pulled his shirt over his mouth and nose, trying to filter the worst of it, but his lungs burned with every breath. Valor stayed ahead, moving with purpose, leading him somewhere specific. Toward the old mill. The structure loomed through the smoke, a massive skeleton of metal and corrugated tin abandoned for 20 years but still standing. And inside, moving shadows that weren't caused by fire. People. 3 of them judging by the shapes, moving frantically trying to get out. Garrett ran closer. The mill's main door had collapsed, trapping whoever was inside. Through a broken window, he could see faces pressed against glass, pounding screaming words lost in the roar of approaching flames. Night security. Probably older men, the kind who took a job watching an abandoned building because it was easy money and quiet work. The kind of men nobody planned to save when they started this fire. Garrett grabbed a rusted metal bar from the ground, jammed it under the collapsed door frame, and heaved. The metal groaned but didn't move. Valor appeared beside him, digging at the debris paws, tearing through rotted wood and twisted metal. Together, they worked. Garrett's muscles screamed. His hands tore open against sharp edges. Blood mixed with sweat and soot. The door shifted. 6 inches. Not enough. He repositioned the bar, found better leverage, thought about Thompson dying because Garrett made the wrong call, thought about Bishop disappearing because no one would help him, thought about 47 names on a list that kept growing. Thought about every time he'd chosen the easy road. Not this time. He roared, throwing everything he had left into the bar. The door frame cracked, splintered, gave way. The gap widened to 2 feet. Go now! 3 men scrambled through, coughing, stumbling, barely able to breathe. The oldest looked 70, the youngest maybe 60, all of them covered in soot, eyes wide with terror. "One is south," Garrett shouted. "Follow the road." They ran. Garrett turned to follow. That's when he heard it. A crack like a gunshot. Then a groan of metal, surrendering to gravity and heat. The roof beam. Coming down. Right toward him. Garrett's brain had time to process it. 300 pounds of steel and wood moving fast, going to hit him in the next half second. Not enough time to move. But Valor moved. The dog slammed into Garrett's legs with the full force of 70 pounds of muscle and momentum, knocking him sideways. The beam fell where Garrett had been standing, and caught Valor instead. The dog's yelp cut through every other sound, the fire, the wind, Garrett's own scream. Valor went down, pinned under the beam, hind leg crushed beneath metal and wood. No, Garrett grabbed the beam. Impossible weight, impossible angle. But nothing was impossible when it was Valor. He lifted, muscles tearing, back screaming, something in his shoulder popping loose. The beam rose 6 inches. "Move, boy, move," Valor tried. Dragged himself forward with his front legs, hind legs useless, whimpering with pain but still trying, still fighting. The beam came down again as Garrett's strength failed, but Valor was clear. Garrett collapsed beside him, hands shaking, vision blurring. He felt the dog's ribs, his legs checking for injuries through the smoke and darkness and terror. The left hind leg was bad, bone broken, maybe shattered, blood matting the fur, but Valor was breathing, conscious. Looking at Garrett with those eyes that had witnessed death but never surrendered to it. "I'm not leaving you," Garrett whispered. "Not this time. Never again." He pulled off his jacket, wrapped it around Valor, lifted the dog in his arms. 70 pounds, plus his pack, plus his own injuries. Impossible weight, impossible distance. But Garrett had carried impossible things before. He'd carried Thompson's body 3 miles through hostile territory, carried guilt for 3 years across 2 continents. Carried the weight of one wrong decision until it crushed everything good he'd ever been. Not this time. Thompson died because Garrett froze. Made the wrong call. Let fear override training. But Valor wasn't Thompson, and Garrett wasn't that paralyzed officer anymore. "I won't freeze again," he whispered into Valor's fur. "Not for you, never for you." The dog's shallow breathing against his chest was the only answer he needed. Still alive, still fighting, still trusting you to get this right. Garrett's vision blurred. From smoke or tears, he couldn't tell anymore. Didn't matter. He started walking anyway. The forest was fully engulfed now. Fire on all sides, heat intense enough to blister skin. Smoke so thick he couldn't see 5 feet ahead. But Garrett had navigated worse. Sandstorms that turned noon into midnight. Jungle so dense you couldn't see sky. This was just another hostile environment. Just another mission. Walk forward. Don't stop. Step by step he pushed forward. His legs gave out twice. Both times he got back up. Because valor had never given up on him. Had pulled him back from flashbacks, from guilt, from the edge of giving up entirely. This was just returning the favor. The smoke started to thin. The heat lessened. The orange glow faded behind them. They'd made it out. Garrett collapsed at the edge of the forest, Valor still in his arms, both of them covered in soot and blood and the smell of smoke. Hands grabbed him. Paramedics, someone taking Valor, someone else checking Garrett's pulse, voices talking fast and urgent. The dog, Garrett gasped. Help the dog first. Sir, you're in shock. Let us help the dog first. A different voice, calm, female. We've got him. Veterinary ambulance is here. We'll take care of him. Garrett felt Valor being lifted away and tried to follow, but his legs wouldn't work anymore. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Valor's steady gaze still locked on him, still loyal, still refusing to quit. Easy now. You did your job. Then nothing. Garrett woke in a hospital bed with no memory of getting there. His throat felt like he'd swallowed broken glass. His hands were bandaged. His shoulder was immobilized. But he was alive. Valor, he croaked. A nurse appeared. Your dog is in surgery. The vet says he'll make it. Broken tibia, some burns, but he'll recover. Relief hit so hard, Garrett nearly blacked out again. How long? You've been out for 6 hours. The fire's contained. They saved the town. The nurse checked his IV. You also have visitors. Sheriff wants to talk to you. So does the FBI. FBI? Got here 3 hours ago. Apparently your email triggered some kind of priority response. She smiled. Whatever you found must have been important. Garrett closed his eyes. Yeah, important. The next week passed in a blur of statements and interviews. FBI agents swarmed Copper Ridge. EPA inspectors descended on the old mill site. The pit where Garrett had found Liam was excavated, revealing 47 industrial barrels of toxic waste, exactly as Bishop had documented. Donovan Ashford was arrested attempting to board a private plane at Missoula Airport. His lawyer immediately began filing motions, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bishop's documentation. Rebecca's father's notes, Garrett's photographs, the physical barrels, water testing that showed contamination levels 40 times the legal limit, 40 years of poisoning, 47 deaths, all proven. Federal prosecutors were seeking 40 years in prison. The evidence was overwhelming. Ashford Industries would be dismantled, assets liquidated to fund victim compensation. Justice slow but certain. The case would take years to prosecute. Ashford would fight every step. But for the first time in 4 decades, the truth was public, and the people of Copper Ridge knew. Rebecca came to visit on the 3rd day. Her house was gone, but she'd moved into an apartment above the library, starting over. They're talking about a class action lawsuit, she said. Everyone who lost someone to cancer. Everyone who got sick from the water. We might actually get justice. You will, Garrett said, because you didn't give up. Neither did you, even when they tried to burn us out. Had some help. Garrett nodded toward the corner of the room where Valor lay on a special orthopedic bed the hospital staff had brought in. The dog's left hind leg was in a cast, but his tail thumped when Rebecca looked at him. She knelt beside Valor, scratching behind his ears. Thank you for not letting him run. Valor's tail thumped harder. The day Garrett was discharged from the hospital, half of Copper Ridge showed up. Marlene brought enough food to feed 20 people. Mrs. O'Connor brought Liam, whose broken ankle was healing well, whose nightmares were fading, whose mother couldn't stop crying grateful tears. You saved my son, she said for the 10th time. How do I ever repay that? You don't, Garrett said. You just raise him right. Teach him to help people who need it. Liam, shy but determined, approached Valor's bed. The dog watched the boy with calm patience. Can I pet him? Liam asked. Garrett nodded. The boy's small hand rested on Valor's head. Thank you for finding me. You're the best dog in the whole world. Valor's tail thumped. Twice. High praise. Sheriff Briggs came by too off duty bringing a handmade wooden plaque. Copper Ridge Honorary Deputy Garrett Sullivan and K-9 Valor for service above, and beyond. It's not official, Briggs said gruffly, but it's real. Garrett shook his hand. It's enough. Rebecca stayed after everyone else left. She pulled a folder from her bag. My father kept a journal. I found it in a fireproof safe he'd hidden in his workshop. She opened it to the last page. This is what he wrote 3 days before he died. Garrett read, "If you're reading this, I'm gone. But the truth isn't. Someone will find it. Someone brave enough to finish what I started. Tell them thank you. Tell them it mattered." Garrett's throat tightened. He knew. He always knew. Just like Bishop. Rebecca smiled through tears. "They're both proud of you. I'm sure of it." "I'm not a hero." "No, you're something better. You're someone who stayed." 2 weeks after the fire, Garrett received a certified letter at the hospital. The return address read, Whitaker and Associates Estate Law, Helena, Montana. He opened it with one hand, the other still bandaged. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead and a cashier's check that made his breath catch. $340,000. The letter was brief. "Dear Mr. Sullivan, I represent the estate of Warren Thomas Bishop, deceased. Per the terms of his last will and testament, executed January 2004, and held in trust pending specific conditions, you are named as sole beneficiary. Conditions for inheritance: 1. You must locate evidence cash at specified coordinates. 2. You must present evidence to federal authorities. 3. You must choose to stay when leaving would be easier. Our firm has monitored news reports confirming you have fulfilled all 3 conditions. The inheritance consists of cash assets $340,000 attached. Real property 160 acres. Copper Ridge, Montana deed transferred to your name, effective immediately. Personal effects already in your possession. Lieutenant Colonel Bishop's final instructions were, tell Garrett he was always better than he believed. The only mission he ever failed was learning to forgive himself. Now he knows. Condolences and congratulations, James Whitaker, Esquire." Garrett read it 3 times. Bishop had bought the land 23 years ago, put it in trust, waited for Garrett to find his way here. Not coincidence. Design. The old man had planned everything. The train, the evidence, the inheritance, even Garrett's guilt-driven exile to Montana. He'd known Garrett would run from Thompson's death, known he'd end up here trying to disappear, and known that once Garrett found the truth, he wouldn't be able to walk away. "You manipulative bastard," Garrett whispered. But he was smiling, because Bishop had been right about all of it. Valor lying in the hospital bed beside him, the staff had given up trying to enforce the no dogs policy, lifted his head and looked at the check. The dog's tail thumped once. "Now you can build something that matters." "Yeah," Garrett said quietly. "Yeah, I can." The Bishop Memorial K-9 Training Center wouldn't just be a name. It would be Bishop's final mission, completed 23 years after his death, by the man he'd trained to never give up, even when giving up felt like the only option left. 3 months later, Garrett stood in the lobby of a building that hadn't existed 3 months ago. The sign out front read, Bishop Memorial K-9 Training Center, built on the 160 acres Garrett owned, funded by Bishop's inheritance in the first wave of Ashford Industries settlement money. Designed to train search and rescue dogs for rural Montana communities that couldn't afford professional programs. Valor lay in the sun on the front porch, watching 6 German Shepherd puppies attempt to navigate a simple obstacle course. The cast was off now, replaced by a slight limp that the vet said would fade with time. One puppy, 8 months old, and all enthusiasm and 0 brain cells, attempted to demonstrate a downstay command. The puppy lay down, immediately stood up distracted by a butterfly. Lay down again, stood up to scratch an ear. Lay down, saw his own tail, spun in 3 circles trying to catch it. Finally lay down panting, looking at Valor for approval. Valor stared at the puppy for a long, silent moment. Then, with the solemnity of a general reviewing troops who'd failed basic training, the dog stood, walked over, and physically pushed the puppy back into the correct down position with his nose. The puppy's tail wagged frantically, completely missing the point that this was not a compliment. Valor returned to his spot, lay down with perfect form, and closed his eyes. The clear message: this is how professionals do it. Watch and learn, though I have severe doubts about your learning capacity. Garrett, watching from the porch, laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. Rebecca, standing beside him, grinned. Valor's going to be an excellent but very judgmental instructor. The best kind. Rebecca's car pulled up the drive. She'd been hired to run the center's administrative operations. Turned out a lifetime of organizing library materials translated well to organizing training schedules and volunteer coordination. "How are they doing?" she asked, climbing out. "Valor's questioning my puppy selection criteria. He questions everything. It's why he's good at his job." They walked to the edge of the property where you could see the forest stretching to the mountains. where the train still sat hidden among the pines, where Bishop's ghost had finally been laid to rest. You could have taken Ashford's money, Rebecca said. Could have sold this land for double and left. Why didn't you? Garrett thought about it. About Thompson, about Bishop, about 47 names on a list, about all the times he'd run from pain instead of staying to face it. Because Valor wouldn't let me. That's simple. That's simple, she smiled. For what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed. Me too. That evening, Garrett sat on the porch with Valor beside him, watching the sunset over Montana. The sky turned gold, then orange, then purple colors bleeding together like watercolor. His phone buzzed, email from the FBI. The case against Ashford Industries was moving forward. Criminal charges filed, civil suits pending, justice slow but inevitable. Garrett deleted the email. He'd done his part. The rest was up to lawyers and judges in a system that was broken, but not completely dead. Valor's head rested on Garrett's knee. The dog's breathing was slow and steady, the rhythm of peace. You know what Bishop said in that recording? Garrett asked quietly. He said, sometimes God puts something in your path you can't run from. Something that matters more than your pain. Valor's tail thumped once. I think he meant you. The tail thumped again. Because you wouldn't let me keep running. Wouldn't let me choose easy over right. Wouldn't let me forget that sometimes the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Garrett looked out at the forest, at the mountains, at the sky turning dark. I spent 3 years doing nothing. Hiding. Running. Letting guilt turn me into someone I didn't recognize. He scratched behind Valor's ears, felt the dog lean into the touch. But you knew something I forgot. You knew I wasn't done yet. Knew I had one more fight left. The stars were coming out now, distant lights in an infinite darkness. Thank you for not giving up on me. Valor's response was to press closer, solid and warm and real. The kind of presence that didn't need words. Garrett pulled out his phone one more time, opened the voice recorder, pressed record. This is Garrett Sullivan. If you're hearing this, it means you're standing where I stood 3 months ago, looking at evidence of something wrong, something you could ignore and walk away from, something that would be easier to let someone else handle. I'm not going to tell you what to do, that's your choice. But I'll tell you this, sometimes miracles don't come like lightning from heaven. Sometimes they come as quiet warnings you almost miss, as loyal friends who refuse to let you run, as the courage to stay when leaving would be easier. I had a commanding officer who died trying to expose the truth. I had a dog who wouldn't let me ignore it. I had a choice between comfort and conscience. I chose conscience, not because I'm brave, because I was too tired of running. Whatever you're facing right now, whatever wrong you've discovered, whatever fight you're trying to avoid, remember this: evil wins when good people do nothing. And you're here reading this, which means you're not the kind of person who does nothing. Stay, fight, trust the loyal friend beside you, whether that's a horse or a person, or that still small voice that won't shut up no matter how hard you try to ignore it. And if you're scared good, that means it matters. That means you're still human enough to care. The world needs people who care more than they're scared. Bishop knew that. Valor knew that. Eventually, I figured it out too. Now it's your turn. Don't do nothing. He stopped recording, saved the file, uploaded it to the cloud, to the center's website, to anywhere someone might stumble across it when they needed to hear it most. Because Bishop's message had reached him across 22 years. Because someone else someday would need the same reminder. Because the fight never really ended. It just passed from one person to the next, a relay race of conscience spanning generations. Valor stood stretched, then walked to the edge of the porch. The dog looked back at Garrett, tail wagging slowly. Come on, one more walk before bed. Garrett smiled. Yeah, I'm coming. They walked into the Montana darkness together, man and dog, both of them scarred, both of them healing, both of them refusing to quit. Behind them, the Bishop Memorial K-9 Training Center glowed with warm light, a promise kept, a legacy honored, a future built on the stubborn insistence that some fights were worth staying for. And somewhere in the forest, if you believed in such things, the ghost of Warren Bishop walked beside them, watching, proud, finally at rest, because the mission was complete. The truth was known, and good men had chosen not to do nothing. The end. Epilogue. Voiceover final scene. Sometimes miracles don't arrive like thunder shaking the earth. Sometimes they arrive as gentle warnings we almost miss, as loyal companions who refuse to let us run from what matters, as the courage to stay when every instinct screams to leave. Lieutenant Colonel Warren Bishop knew the truth could save lives, but truth needs protectors. Brave souls willing to carry it forward when others fall. Rebecca's father knew. He documented crimes until cancer silenced him. Bishop knew. He hid evidence until someone worth trusting could find it. Valor knew. He refused to leave when leaving made sense. And Garrett Sullivan, a man running from guilt, from pain, from the weight of one wrong decision, learned what they all knew. Sometimes God doesn't change our circumstances to make them easier. He places the right companion beside us and waits to see if we have the courage to listen. In this story, a dog refused to abandon a mission his handler didn't know he needed to complete. In your life, that companion might be different. A friend who won't let you quit. A conviction that won't stay silent. A still small voice that calls you towards something bigger than your fear. The question isn't whether you'll face that choice. The question is whether you'll honor it. Today, someone needs you to stay, to fight, to choose conscience over comfort. Not because it's easy, because it's right. And because loyal hearts, whether human or canine, always choose to stay. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below. What moment in this story will stay with you? Subscribe for more stories about loyalty, faith, and the redemption found when we stop running from who we're meant to be. May God bless you and keep you. May He guide your steps beyond your fear. And may He place loyal companions on your path when you need them most. Amen.